It's time for another story that proves how devastatingly pathetic mainstream media in this country is. MSNBC has done 455 Stormy Daniels segments in the last year, but none on the U.S. war in Yemen. Why is the supposed network of the anti-Trump resistance totally ignoring the president's most devastating war? This is from Adam Johnson of FAIR, and he does a great job here. I mean, even tracking this in the first place. It was a brilliant thing to do because this is the kind of substantive stuff that I would hope media watchdogs are doing, and I would hope the media is doing. I've often tried to prod Media Matters to do this thing where they, figure out how often the media is covering the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. They haven't done it yet, which is annoying, but I want them to do it because I want to see that. I want to see okay, they only brought up the war in Iraq 3 times in a year. So that, again, we can prove how pathetic and absurd and sensationalist the media is. All they want to do is cover the hot button issues of the day. They'd rather cover Kanye West and Kim Kardashian than cover war, famine, drought, climate change, corruption, income inequality. So let me tell you what he says here. As FAIR has noted before, to MSNBC, the carnage and destruction the U.S. and its Gulf monarchy allies are leveling against the poorest country in the Arab world is simply a non-issue. On July 2nd, a year had passed since the cable network's last segment mentioning U.S. participation in the war on Yemen, which has killed in excess of 15,000 people and resulted in over 1 million cases of cholera. The U.S. is backing a Saudi-led bombing campaign with intelligence, refueling, political cover, military hardware, and, as of March, ground troops. None of this matters at all to what Adweek calls the network of the resistance, which has, since its last mention of the U.S. role in the destruction of Yemen, found time to run over a dozen segments highlighting war crimes committed by the Syrian and Russian governments in Syria. Weird. It's almost like their human rights concerns are shallow and serving the U.S. deep state and the powers that be. So the military-industrial complex, we want you to blame other world leaders who are not U.S. allies for their atrocities while totally overlooking our own atrocities. Noam Chomsky says it best. There's a great way to stop terrorism. Stop participating in it. So you want to stop terrorism? Okay. Try to stop the terrorism that your government is primarily responsible for, because it's your tax money funding it. With your money in your name, we're bombing 8 different countries, including aiding a fucking blockade that's making a country starve to death. That's what's happening in Yemen right now. There's a cholera outbreak, totally preventable, but we're not allowing the medicine in to cure it. So, but no, they'd rather deflect to look at those human rights abusers over there. Us? No, ours don't count. Why don't they count? Well, we mean well or something? Do you? I don't think you do. If you're buddy-buddy with Saudi Arabia, a brutally repressive government, if you're buddy-buddy with Israel, who, by the way, just codified their apartheid system, they're like, we need more, they passed a law, we need more Jewish-only enclaves. What? That's like, in South Africa passing a law. It's cool. We're not racist or anything. We're not bigoted, but we need more white-only enclaves. Well, then just call it what it is. If you're in favor of that, argue for it. Be open and straightforward about it. Oh, yeah, I'm in favor of that. Okay, well, then you're arguing for apartheid. That's what that is. So when our allies commit atrocities and human rights violations, we don't say shit. In fact, we ate it. We openly ate it. And the media is not covering it. And I don't buy the argument that this isn't something that politicians would be able to run on anyway. Yes, it is. You want to know why? Not only because, we're responsible for death and destruction around the world, but also because what a waste of money and resources. Why the fuck are we aiding a terror state to massacre women and children and starve the country to death? Why are we doing that? Why are we doing that? Of course you could run a campaign on that. But even putting aside the campaign, the media itself, they have a responsibility to cover this kind of stuff. And they're not. 0 segments, 455 on a fucking porn star that allegedly had an affair with the president. 0 on the massacre in Yemen. And you wonder why I lose my mind. And you wonder why I feel like we live in the Twilight Zone. Because you have so many substantive issues to attack the Republicans on, to try to change the system for the better. You need information, you need education in order to digest it and then try to change the reality of the world and make it better. But they're not even bothering to cover the things that are super important and that matter deeply. This is why I go nuts. And this is why this show exists, to point this stuff out and to tell you how the media is lying to you. And they're not serious. They're not. It's all a bunch of fucking pampered narcissists in mainstream media. That's what it is. MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, that's what it is. They don't know shit. They don't care about the world and the news and what's actually happening. They're deeply unserious, which is why serious issues go uncovered. Talk about Stormy Daniels all day long and never bring up Yemen. The fact that we are responsible for the devastation of a country that didn't attack us. It's the 8th country that we're currently bombing. Like I said, women and children being massacred. They've bombed, Saudi Arabia has bombed mosques. They've bombed hospitals. They've bombed open air markets. And by the way, when Yemenis look through the damage, oftentimes they see, that they're U.S. bombs. And then we ask, why do they hate us? Well, that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons. Because they're using our weapons to massacre civilians, and then they see that. So even from just a practical standpoint of, hey, let's not create more enemies, we should be calling this out and talking about it and trying to end it. But this really exposes how much of a ruse it is that the U.S. government cares about human rights and altruism and that we're the world police. It's laughable. It's laughable. We'll point at some less egregious offense some foreign government did that's not an ally of ours, and we'll act like they're the biggest monster on earth, but then we carry out shit like this all the time. It doesn't even get mentioned. They don't even talk about it. The network of the resistance is like, yeah, go ahead, partake in a genocide, Republican President Donald Trump. Partake in a genocide. We don't care. We're not going to call it out. Because we are wired to default to always the shittiest argument. Why would we talk about partaking in a genocide of innocent women and children with our weapons and our money in our name when Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump had a press conference where they said mildly kind things to each other? We could talk about that for 4 days straight. Why would we talk about partaking in a genocide? This is why I lose my mind. This is why I go crazy. And this is one of many issues that just goes uncovered. Yeah, go ahead. Try finding a corruption, money in politics, open bribery story. Go try to find an expose on Goldman Sachs on MSNBC or in mainstream media. Go ahead. Try to find a really detailed story on income and wealth inequality. Go ahead. I'll wait. Not going to find it. Stormy Daniels, Russiagate, all this nonsense. And you wonder why so many people don't really know what's going on, too. I don't blame the average American. It's not their fault. I blame the media for not educating them, and I blame the politicians for not talking about this and trying to change it. But now you know. Go ahead. Talk to... I'm sure most people have no idea that we're even partaking in this in Yemen or that anything negative is going on in Yemen. Guarantee you. Because as Noam Chomsky said, this is manufacturing consent. The media comes from the corporate class. So they represent corporate interests, billionaire interests, the interests of the elite and the rich. So if you're painting a picture of the world that's in the interests of the elite and the rich and corporations, you're not going to rock the boat with the status quo. A lot of people are making a lot of money from our continued sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia and our continued bombardment campaign of an innocent country that didn't attack us. So don't talk about that because you might scare some investors. You might, I was going to say shake the boat, but I don't think that's the way that the saying goes. You might rock the boat. So don't throw a wrench in this. Don't fuck it up. Don't call out the military-industrial complex because you might affect the bottom line of some of the people that are part of that same elite corporate class that the media represents. They don't represent your interests. They don't represent an objective analysis. They don't give you empirical data. It's biased and it's a reflection of what elites want you to see in the first place, which is why Talking about Stormy Daniels is totally safe. It allows you to resist without resisting. Talking about Russiagate is totally safe. Isn't it weird how the most prominent narrative coming out of the so-called liberal network, so-called left network, MSNBC, the resistance network, it's very flattering of the deep state. The whole narrative is Trump is an evil Manchurian candidate. Isn't the CIA and the NSA and the FBI awesome? They're awesome, aren't they? So now you have this cheerleading for the same agencies that lied us into the Iraq War. And then there's this show. We need a wider reach to have a bigger impact, but goddamn, is that needed. Not just from a selfish perspective, which of course that's there, but also because who else is going to talk about this? 455 Stormy Daniels segments, none on the war in Yemen. Mind-blowing and inexcusable.